The fundamental challenge of making choices lies in how we measure the worth of human existence when resources are desperately scarce. When faced with an immediate crisis, looking at the ultimate outcome provides the most reliable foundation for establishing a rational framework of justice. True justice is not found in abstract, unyielding rules, but rather in the measurable impact our actions have on the collective well-being of a community. If a difficult decision prevents a greater catastrophe, it is the only logical course of action to pursue. The primary goal of any ethical system must be to minimize suffering while expanding safety, stability, and security for the largest group possible. We live in a world where hard realities frequently force our hands, making pristine moral perfection an impossible standard to maintain. When an emergency strikes, evaluating choices based on their direct consequences allows us to act with clarity, purpose, and logic. Refusing to calculate the outcomes of our choices often results in far greater ruin than making a difficult sacrifice. True responsibility requires a willingness to weigh competing outcomes and courageously choose the path that preserves the greatest amount of human life. Every day, individuals and entire societies must navigate complex, high-stakes scenarios where protecting the majority requires accepting a localized loss. This perspective recognizes that human choices do not happen in a vacuum, but rather inside a complex web of interconnected cause and effect. By focusing directly on the tangible results of an action, we establish a practical, real-world standard that can be consistently applied. This analytical approach strips away emotional bias and cultural prejudice, leaving behind a clear metric based entirely on survival and collective welfare. When resources run dangerously low or dangers escalate rapidly, adhering strictly to rigid formulas can lead to absolute devastation. It is far better to deliberately manage a crisis to ensure the survival of the group than to let passive inaction destroy everyone. This method prioritizes the preservation of vital human potential over the maintenance of symbolic, unyielding rules that offer no practical relief. Ultimately, a society thrives when its governing principles focus entirely on securing the most favorable conditions for the community as a whole. When analyzing historical crises and sudden disasters, the most heroic actions are consistently those that successfully shield the wider population from catastrophic harm. When individuals take decisive action to contain a threat, they are hailed as protectors because they understood the vital mathematics of human survival. These moments demonstrate that deep down, communities instinctively value the protection of the greater collective over isolated individual outcomes. It is a harsh but necessary reality that some situations offer no completely painless way out for every single participant. In these high-pressure moments, a passive refusal to choose is itself a profound choice that often guarantees a much worse outcome. True moral courage involves looking at a bleak situation, calculating the potential damage, and steering toward the least destructive result. Expecting absolute safety for every individual in a broken system is a dangerous illusion that can easily compound human tragedy. By anchoring our choices to measurable, real-world benefits, we ensure that decisions are driven by logic rather than paralyzing fear. Critics often argue that focusing purely on outcomes can lead down a dangerous path where individual security is completely compromised for the group. They worry that this logical framework could be used to justify horrific historic injustices or validate authoritarian control over innocent populations. However, this perspective completely misunderstands the core objective of a system built entirely on maximizing long-term stability and human happiness. True collective welfare cannot survive in an environment defined by constant terror, unpredictability, and the systemic violation of personal security. A rational analysis of human behavior shows that societies flourish only when citizens feel secure, valued, and protected from arbitrary harm. Therefore, a properly applied focus on outcomes naturally values stable legal frameworks, predictable rules, and deep respect for individual life. Sacrificing personal security haphazardly would destroy the very social trust required to maintain a functional, peaceful, and prosperous civilization. The goal is always to build a stable framework where the community can experience the highest baseline of safety. To fully understand this perspective, we must examine how our daily moral intuition functions when we are stripped of comfortable distractions. When people are asked to evaluate high-stakes crises, their initial reactions almost always align with preserving the largest number of lives. This widespread agreement shows that human reason naturally looks for ways to minimize the total impact of a tragedy. It is only when the specific mechanics of the choice become visceral that people begin to hesitate and doubt their instincts. Yet, this hesitation is driven by emotional discomfort rather than a flaw in the underlying logic of the choice itself. The physical method of how a result is achieved does not alter the mathematical reality of the lives saved or lost. True intellectual consistency requires us to look past immediate emotional discomfort and focus firmly on the ultimate outcome of our decisions. When we look at the big picture, the primary obligation of any decision maker is to leave the world with less overall grief. The tension between emotional reactions and logical choices becomes incredibly clear when we shift from passive observations to active interventions. People often feel a deep sense of hesitation when a choice requires them to directly intervene in a developing crisis. This internal conflict creates an artificial barrier between actions that feel direct and those that seem distant or passive. However, from a strictly logical viewpoint, allowing a tragedy to occur through deliberate inaction carries the exact same weight as causing it. The final state of the world remains identical whether a person actively redirects a threat or steps back and lets it happen. Relying entirely on emotional comfort can paralyze decision makers, leading to catastrophic failures that could have easily been avoided with a clear mind. A truly responsible framework demands that we master our internal discomfort to secure the best possible outcome for the community. The value of an action is found in the safety it creates, not in the comfort of the person choosing. Consider how these ideas apply to the medical field, where professionals must routinely make agonizing choices regarding limited space and resources. In an understaffed emergency room, a doctor cannot afford the luxury of pretending that every single patient can receive unlimited attention. If a physician dedicates all their time to one critical individual while letting 5 others perish, the total loss is catastrophic. In these high-stress environments, triage protocols are specifically designed to maximize the number of lives restored to health and family. These established medical practices prove that when lives are on the line, we instinctively trust an outcome-based calculation. Society respects and honors these medical professionals precisely because they have the fortitude to make objective, life-saving calculations under pressure. If doctors operated under rigid, unyielding rules that ignored the volume of patients, the medical system would collapse into chaos. Maximizing the return of health to the greatest number of citizens is the only sustainable path for public medicine. However, a profound conflict emerges when we look at different scenarios where identical mathematics yield entirely different social reactions. For instance, the thought of sacrificing a completely healthy person to harvest organs for 5 dying patients triggers immediate horror. This extreme divide in public opinion forces us to look deeper into how we structure our concepts of social duty. The widespread refusal to accept an organ harvesting scenario is not a failure of logic, but a defense of societal stability. If citizens believed that a routine doctor visit could result in an arbitrary sacrifice, the entire healthcare system would vanish. Trust would disappear overnight, causing millions of people to avoid medical care entirely, creating a massive wave of preventable suffering. Therefore, protecting the innocent individual in this specific instance is actually the most logical path to maximize long-term public welfare. The preservation of systemic trust is vastly more valuable to the community than the immediate gain of a few specific lives. The true genius of this philosophical approach lies in its remarkable simplicity and its powerful, intuitive appeal to human reasoning. This framework asserts that the ultimate measure of any action is its ability to maximize utility across the entire population. Utility is defined as the clear balance of pleasure over pain, happiness over suffering, and security over systemic chaos. This foundational idea recognizes that all human beings are fundamentally guided by a desire for well-being and an aversion to injury. Because this human condition is universal, it provides a perfectly objective foundation for building laws, policies, and personal ethics. It removes the need to rely on conflicting religious dogmas or mysterious, unprovable theories about natural metadata cosmic rules. Instead, it offers a practical, measurable standard that treats every individual's capacity for happiness with equal importance. By aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number, we create a clear path toward a more organized society. When applied to the creation of public policy and legislation, this outcome-focused method provides an incredibly effective tool for resolving disputes. Instead of debating endless ideological theories, lawmakers can focus entirely on gathering data regarding the tangible impacts of potential laws. A policy is judged to be good or bad based entirely on whether it measurably improves the quality of life for the community. This data-driven approach allows for constant adaptation, refinement, and progress as society faces brand new challenges over time. It encourages leaders to look at real-world evidence rather than clinging stubbornly to outdated traditions that no longer serve the people. When a government focuses on maximizing collective security, it establishes a reliable baseline of prosperity that benefits everyone within its borders. This practical focus ensures that resources are allocated efficiently, infrastructure is built logically, and public safety is maintained effectively. The ultimate validation of any legal system is the visible, measurable flourishing of the population it governs. To truly appreciate the power of this system, we must look at its historical roots and how it transformed legal theory. During the 18th century, legal systems were often chaotic, corrupt, and built on superstitious traditions that caused immense human suffering. Early thinkers revolutionized the field by suggesting that laws should be designed scientifically to produce the maximum amount of public happiness. They argued that punishments should not be based on primitive desires for vengeance, but on deterring future crimes efficiently. This intellectual shift led to massive reforms that made legal systems far more humane, predictable, and fair for ordinary citizens. By replacing arbitrary royal decrees with a clear focus on public utility, societies began to value efficiency and welfare. This historical transformation proves that focusing on outcomes is not a cold, unfeeling exercise, but a deeply compassionate movement. It rescued countless individuals from cruel, unusual punishments and established the modern expectation that governments must serve their people. As we dive into complex case studies, we see how these principles operate when individuals are pushed to the absolute edge. Real-world events frequently present us with scenarios that are far more complicated than any neat, hypothetical thought experiment. When a ship sinks in the open ocean and survivors are left stranded on a tiny lifeboat, ordinary rules vanish. In these extreme conditions, the thin veneer of civilized luxury burns away, leaving only the raw, undeniable math of basic survival. If 4 individuals are trapped with zero food, a refusal to act means that all 4 will inevitably die of starvation. If a difficult sacrifice allows the majority to return home to their loved ones, it becomes the only viable path. These desperate situations show that human morality cannot be completely separated from the immediate physical realities of survival. Expecting individuals to passively accept total extinction for the sake of an abstract rule ignores the most primal drives of reason. When analyzing these historical survival cases, a clear pattern emerges regarding how communities evaluate these extreme actions after the fact. While the public is often shocked by the grim details, there is an underlying understanding of the desperate necessity involved. People recognize that when total destruction is the alternative, normal standards of conduct simply cannot apply to the situation. This realistic perspective allows us to maintain compassion for the survivors while acknowledging the brutal math they had to endure. It recognizes that true justice must be flexible enough to accommodate the absolute extremes of the human condition. Forcing a rigid legal standard onto a situation where survival was physically impossible without action is a form of cruelty. A mature society must be capable of looking past its immediate revulsion to understand the underlying logic of survival. By doing so, we preserve a framework of justice that remains grounded in the reality of human life. The constant search for alignment between our specific reactions and our broad principles is what drives intellectual progress forward. When we encounter a case that challenges our established worldview, we are forced to re-examine the foundations of our beliefs. This process of continuous refinement prevents our ethical frameworks from becoming stagnant, obsolete, or completely disconnected from reality. It forces us to ask whether our rules are actually serving humanity or if we are serving the rules blindly. A healthy mind welcomes this internal tension as an opportunity to build a more robust, comprehensive understanding of world dynamics. By constantly testing our theories against difficult, real-world dilemmas, we strip away superficial assumptions and uncover core truths. This intellectual journey ensures that our approach to justice remains vibrant, responsive, and deeply useful for everyday life. Ultimately, the goal is to build a philosophy that can withstand the harshest storms of reality. Furthermore, this perspective completely eliminates the confusion that often arises when different cultures clash over abstract moral definitions. Because every human culture understands the concepts of pain, pleasure, and survival, an outcome-based framework provides a universal language. It allows diverse global communities to find common ground and collaborate effectively on massive international challenges like public health. Instead of arguing over conflicting spiritual values, nations can agree on policies that measurably reduce disease, poverty, and violence. This universal applicability makes it the most practical tool for navigating an increasingly interconnected and complex global landscape. It focuses our collective energy on solving tangible problems that directly impact the daily lives of billions of people. When we prioritize measurable well-being, we move past divisive rhetoric and work toward a safer world for future generations. The ultimate value of any philosophy is its capacity to unite humanity around shared, practical goals. It is also vital to recognize that focusing on consequences does not mean ignoring the long-term emotional impact of our actions. A true calculation of utility must include the psychological well-being, peace of mind, and mental health of the community. Actions that create immediate material gains but leave behind a legacy of deep trauma can actually reduce long-term happiness. Therefore, this framework naturally encourages kindness, empathy, and deep community support because these behaviors produce immense joy and stability. It recognizes that a healthy society requires emotional warmth, mutual respect, and a strong sense of belonging to truly thrive. By including these subtle factors into our worldview, we create a sophisticated approach to human happiness. We learn that maximizing utility is not just about raw physical survival, but about cultivating a vibrant culture. The goal is to build an environment where both the physical and emotional needs of the majority are secured. When we look at the alternative approaches to justice, we often find a rigid dogmatism that fails to provide practical guidance. Systems built entirely on categorical rules frequently run into impossible contradictions when two absolute duties collide with each other. For example, if a rule states it is always wrong to cause harm but another states you must protect the innocent, a crisis leaves you completely paralyzed. In these moments, rigid frameworks offer no clear exit path, often leading to disasters caused by pure indecisiveness. An outcome-based system avoids this paralysis by providing a single, clear metric to resolve any competing values instantly. It allows us to adapt to shifting circumstances without abandoning our core commitment to human welfare and safety. This flexibility is not a sign of moral weakness, but a profound demonstration of practical strength and resilience. It ensures that our ethical choices always remain focused on producing the best possible version of reality. The ongoing study of these ideas serves as a powerful awakening for the human mind, challenging us to abandon easy complacency. It forces us to confront the fact that we live out the answers to these deep philosophical questions every single day. Every vote we cast, every policy we support, and every personal choice we make contributes directly to the collective outcome. We cannot escape this responsibility by simply hiding behind convenient skepticism or pretending that choices do not matter. Throwing up our hands and claiming that all perspectives are purely subjective is a lazy evasion of our civic duty. True intellectual maturity requires us to step into the arena, examine the evidence, and commit to maximizing public good. This course of reflection may shake our oldest assumptions, but it leaves us far better equipped to navigate life. By embracing the challenge, we become active participants in shaping a more rational, safe, and prosperous world. Ultimately, the validity of an action must be tied directly to the visible legacy of health and security it leaves behind. When the dust settles after a crisis, history does not care about the pure intentions of leaders who let disasters happen. History judges choices by the families that survived, the communities that rebuilt, and the stability that was successfully maintained. A philosophy that prioritizes abstract ideals over actual human survival risks sacrificing real people on the altar of theory. We must remain firmly committed to protecting the living, breathing population that relies on clear, logical governance every day. By keeping our focus entirely on maximizing the tangible well-being of the collective, we fulfill the true purpose of justice. This is the enduring promise of a practical worldview. It keeps our feet anchored in reality while striving for safety. It ensures that our search for justice always results in a world with less suffering. As we move forward into deeper analysis, we must carry this practical lens with us to evaluate even more complex human narratives. We will encounter historical scenarios where individuals were stripped of all societal support and forced into the deepest dark. In those moments, we must resist the urge to judge their actions through the lens of comfortable, everyday luxury. We must have the intellectual honesty to ask what we would truly do if the survival of the group depended entirely on our willingness to make a difficult choice. By exploring these boundaries, we discover the true limits and capabilities of human reason under absolute pressure. This investigation is not merely an academic exercise, it is an exploration of the core mechanisms that keep civilization alive. Let us proceed with a clear commitment to logic, evidence, and the unyielding pursuit of the collective good. The journey ahead demands our full analytical focus and a willingness to see reality exactly as it is. Part 2. The true test of any system of justice is how it performs when applied to the messy, unpredictable details of real history. When we look at the famous legal case of the Queen versus Dudley and Stevens, we see these principles challenged in the ultimate crucible. 4 English sailors were trapped on a tiny lifeboat in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from land, with no clear hope of rescue. Their initial provisions consisted of a mere 2 tins of turnips and no fresh water, an amount completely inadequate for survival. For days, they managed to extend their meager resources, showing incredible discipline and restraint under terrifying conditions. However, as the weeks dragged on without sight of a sail, the brutal reality of their situation became completely undeniable. The internal systems of the human body cannot function indefinitely without sustenance, and starvation began to claim its victims. In this extreme state, the survival of the group required an objective assessment of their remaining options. To understand the choices made on that lifeboat, we must examine the specific roles and health conditions of the individuals involved. The crew consisted of 3 experienced seamen and a young cabin boy named Richard Parker, who was only 17 years old. Parker, inexperienced and driven by intense thirst, had foolishly consumed sea water, which accelerated his physical collapse dramatically. While the older men remained relatively functional, the young cabin boy lay in the bottom of the boat, helpless and slipping into a deep coma. The crew was faced with a stark mathematical reality. If they did not act, all 4 individuals would certainly perish within days. By choosing to sacrifice the individual who was already closest to death, the remaining crew members managed to sustain themselves until a passing vessel finally spotted them. This dramatic rescue ensured that 3 fathers returned to their families, preventing a far larger wave of grief and destitution at home. When this case reached the English courts, it sparked a massive national debate regarding the limits of legal necessity and personal survival. The public was deeply torn between an immediate emotional revulsion and a logical understanding of the extreme circumstances involved. From a strictly outcome-focused perspective, the survival of 3 individuals is objectively superior to the total extinction of all 4 crew members. If the crew had chosen to let everyone die out of respect for an abstract rule, the world would have lost 4 lives instead of 1. Such an outcome represents a complete failure of rational decision-making, resulting in maximum unnecessary suffering for no tangible benefit. True compassion in a crisis requires the courage to accept a localized tragedy to prevent a total catastrophe from occurring. The survivors did not act out of malice or hatred, but out of a desperate, calculated need to preserve human life. Their actions, though grim, were the only way to minimize the total loss of human potential. Furthermore, a detailed analysis of the crew's demographics reveals a deeper layer of social utility that cannot be ignored. The 3 adult sailors had wives, children, and entire extended families who depended completely on their income and presence for survival. If these men had died at sea, their families would have been thrown into absolute poverty, causing widespread long-term suffering. In contrast, the young cabin boy was an orphan with no dependents, meaning his death, while tragic, left no families destitute. An ethical system that focuses on maximizing total well-being must take these cascading social impacts into account. The death of a breadwinner creates a ripple effect of economic and emotional misery that damages the broader community. By preserving the men with the greatest social responsibilities, the survival choice minimized the total volume of grief inflicted on the world. This calculation shows that looking at the broader context is essential for true justice. This historical case perfectly illustrates why rigid, unyielding rules fail to provide adequate guidance when humanity is pushed to the absolute edge. If a law states that taking a life is always categorically wrong, it completely ignores the physical reality of unavoidable destruction. It creates an absurd situation where path of passive inaction, which leads to 4 deaths, is viewed as superior to an active choice that saves 3. This blind adherence to abstract purity completely detaches morality from its proper purpose, serving the actual welfare of living human beings. A law that demands total collective suicide in the face of crisis is a law that has lost all rational justification. True justice must be grounded in the real world, adapting to the extreme constraints that environment imposes on us. When survival is mathematically impossible without sacrifice, the rules of comfortable civilization must yield to the preservation of life. Critics of this view often claim that allowing such actions creates a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the entire legal order. They worry that if necessity can justify a sacrifice, it opens the door to arbitrary violence and lawlessness across society. However, this concern fails to recognize that extreme survival scenarios are completely distinct from ordinary civilian life. A society can easily maintain strict laws against violence in everyday life while recognizing exemptions for absolute, provable physical necessity at sea. The context of a starving crew on a boundless ocean is fundamentally different from a stable community with access to abundant resources. A rational legal system is entirely capable of drawing clear, logical boundaries around these extreme exceptions without eroding everyday social trust. Denying the reality of necessity does not protect the law, it merely makes the law appear cruel, unfeeling, and completely irrational. When the survivors returned to land, their communities actually demonstrated a profound intuitive understanding of this exact distinction. Rather than treating the men as malicious criminals, the local public and fellow mariners viewed them with immense sympathy and understanding. They recognized that the crew had been trapped in a living nightmare where conventional moral choices had completely ceased to exist. This widespread support shows that ordinary people naturally understand the importance of context and outcomes when evaluating behavior. It is often the detached legal theorists, sitting in comfortable courtrooms, who try to enforce an unrealistic standard of absolute purity. The people grounded in reality understand that when choices are reduced to survival or extinction, logic must prevail over sentimentality. The ultimate goal of human association is to keep people alive, and the survivors achieved that goal under the worst conditions imaginable. To expand our understanding of these dynamics, let us shift our focus to modern institutional frameworks that operate on identical principles. Every time a government allocates a healthcare budget, it is actively deciding how to distribute life and death based on outcomes. If a state decides to fund a widespread vaccination program rather than a highly expensive treatment for a rare disease, it is making a calculated choice. The resources are directed where they will save the highest number of citizens, even if it means some individuals are left without options. This standard practice demonstrates that modern civilization cannot function without consistently applying outcome-based math to public life. We do not condemn lawmakers for making these difficult choices, we expect them to do so with efficiency and clarity. It is the only responsible way to manage public funds and protect the health of the collective population. The same logic applies to public infrastructure projects, such as building highways, bridges, and complex mass transit systems. Engineers and policymakers know with absolute certainty that a predictable number of workers will lose their lives during massive construction projects. Yet, society deliberately chooses to move forward with these developments because the long-term benefits to millions of citizens outweigh the localized risk. The improved infrastructure saves travel time, reduces everyday transportation accidents, and boosts economic prosperity for generations. If we allowed a categorical rule against risking any human life to stop all development, society would completely stagnate into decay. We accept these calculated risks because we understand that expanding the general welfare is worth the predictable costs involved. True progress requires a clear, macro-level view of human activity, focusing on the massive benefits achieved for the majority. This structural approach also provides the most effective framework for managing massive global crises, such as pandemics or climate emergencies. When a dangerous virus threatens to overwhelm a nation, public health officials must implement rules that prioritize the safety of the collective. This often requires restricting individual freedoms, shutting down businesses, and redirecting resources on a massive scale to contain the spread. While these measures cause real economic hardship and personal frustration, they are fully justified by the millions of lives protected. An outcome-focused strategy allows leaders to act with decisive authority, utilizing data and statistics to guide their interventions effectively. It prevents a nation from falling into paralyzing debates over individual preferences when the survival of the population is at stake. The strength of a society is measured by its ability to unite around the shared goal of minimizing total harm. Furthermore, this perspective offers a highly compassionate way to approach international relations and the tragic realities of modern defense. When a nation is forced to defend itself against aggression, military leaders must make choices that minimize the total destruction of life. Strategic decisions are built entirely on containing threats quickly to restore long-term peace and civilian stability to the region. By focusing on the ultimate outcome of stability, leaders can navigate these terrifying conflicts with a clear, objective purpose. The goal is always to minimize the duration of suffering and re-establish a secure environment where human communities can safely rebuild. A sentimental refusal to engage in defense can often lead to far worse suffering under the unchecked control of ruthless aggressors. True responsibility means confronting the world as it is, using logic to protect the future of the community. When we strip away the comforting illusions of absolute safety, we see that life is a continuous series of trade-offs and calculations. No individual can escape this reality, and pretending otherwise is merely a form of intellectual cowardice. Every single day, our collective choices shape the baseline of safety, health, and happiness experienced by our neighbors. By consciously embracing an outcome-focused framework, we align our personal choices with the long-term thriving of our species. It allows us to rise above personal biases, emotional tantrums, and cultural divisions to work toward measurable global progress. We begin to see ourselves as part of a massive, shared human journey where the primary goal is to uplift the collective. This perspective brings a profound sense of clarity, purpose, and real-world utility to our everyday lives and public institutions. It is also important to address the psychological piece that comes from adopting a consistent, logical approach to difficult choices. When faced with an agonizing decision, individuals who rely on fleeting emotions are often left completely shattered by guilt and doubt. In contrast, a mind anchored in a clear outcome-based framework finds deep solace in knowing they chose the path of least destruction. They understand that when an environment presents only bad options, the highest duty is to choose the least harmful result. This realization provides the mental resilience required to lead communities through the darkest periods of history without losing focus. It transforms paralyzing panic into structured, effective action that directly saves lives and stabilizes volatile situations. True leadership is defined by the ability to carry the heavy emotional weight of a calculation for the sake of the group. As we look to the future, the rapid rise of new technologies will demand an even more rigorous application of these principles. For instance, the programming of self-driving vehicles requires engineers to write explicit code for handling unavoidable accidents. If a vehicle faces a sudden choice between hitting a crowd of pedestrians or sacrificing its own passenger, the code must decide. A rational system must prioritize the preservation of the many over the one, embedding outcome-based logic directly into our technology. If we refuse to make these calculations deliberately, we leave the future of public safety to random chance and chaotic mechanics. By intentionally designing our automated systems to maximize public utility, we create a far more predictable and secure world. The integration of logic into technology is the next natural step in the evolution of human safety. The study of these deep ethical challenges ultimately serves as a powerful mirror for the true state of our intellectual maturity. It forces us to move past the superficial rhetoric of political slogans and confront the hard mathematics of structural justice. We learn that true morality is not a luxury designed to make us feel saintly and pure in an isolated room. It is a practical, hard-nosed tool designed to solve real-world problems and protect living populations from unnecessary destruction. When we have the courage to look past immediate emotional discomfort, we discover a beautiful, rational path forward. This analytical journey strips away the unnecessary clutter of dogma, leaving behind a vibrant focus on human flourishing. Let us continue to build a society that values evidence, celebrates logic, and remains deeply dedicated to the public good. This practical focus ensures that our search for justice never degenerates into a useless exercise in ideological vanity. We must always measure the value of our principles by the real-world safety and happiness they generate for ordinary people. A theory that looks beautiful on paper but causes absolute ruin when applied to a lifeboat is a theory we must abandon. We owe it to ourselves, our families, and our future to keep our ethics firmly rooted in the soil of reality. By committing to maximizing the total well-being of the collective, we fulfill the truest and highest purpose of human association. This is the enduring legacy of a rational mind. It keeps its focus entirely on leaving the world with more security. It ensures that our collective efforts are always directed toward the continuous uplift of the human community. In conclusion, the investigation of historical cases like Dudley and Stevens reminds us that justice is forged in the fires of real necessity. It challenges us to maintain our analytical focus even when the narratives become incredibly dark and uncomfortable to process. By understanding the underlying logic of survival and utility, we build a far more resilient and compassionate framework for the modern world. We learn to appreciate the heavy burdens carried by those who must make difficult choices under absolute pressure for the group. Let us carry these insights forward as we continue to evaluate the complex legal, political, and social challenges of our times. The path of reason demands our complete dedication, our intellectual honesty, and our unwavering commitment to the collective welfare of humanity. With this clear mindset, we can confidently navigate any storm that the future may bring to our civilization.